Hi, I'm Gary Young.
And I'm Carys and Gary.
Every week, Carys and I will be talking about those stories in the news that are overreported and the ones that are going completely under the radar and not talked about enough.
This is Over the Top, Under the Radar. Gary, I'm seeing you twice in 1 week.
I know.
It's very exciting.
I know. People will talk.
We had our live event last night.
It was awesome. Thank you for everybody who turned out to the Bernie Grant Arts Centre in Tottenham.
Yeah, it was a proper sort of theatre auditorium, wasn't it? The lights went up as you were trying to throw a beanie into the crowd. This will become clear to listeners next week when you'll be able to hear the episode. And I just looked and it was just such a lovely assortment of people, really diverse, lots of great fashion, some very strong knitwear. And yeah, it felt special.
I don't think I've ever heard that term before. Strong knitwear. Is that a Welsh thing, Welsh Ghanaian thing?
No, I think strong. Overly using the word strong, I think is a Carys thing. But right in if I'm wrong.
Belle was fantastic.
Fellow South Londoner and Ghanaian, so that was nice. Really needed more of both of those energies, if I'm honest.
Nadine White was there too. She writes for The Independent. Frankly, I don't think they deserve her. Brilliant journalist.
Should follow it. And you got told off in a pub for bringing your own can of Red Stripe in, which I thought was very Gary.
I hadn't finished it. So, what do you want from me?
I mean, interesting to try and use that as a defense in a pub. That's not really how it works with drinking. They don't want you to bring drinks in from somewhere else. They don't like bring your own.
I also ordered Red Stripe. So, I mean, I was with the Red Stripe family.
Well, it must not have been in a can because he clocked your can and was like, that shouldn't be here.
Yeah, no, it was a violation.
Of you?
No, it was, I get the rules, but I had not finished.
You choose not to follow them.
Well, I hadn't finished it. So I chose not to follow that one in that moment and suffer the consequences, which was really much less consequence than I would have got when I was little for doing a lot less at home. Just a touch.
So no regrets. Yeah. Unrepentant.
Oh, absolutely unrepentant. But I'm not going to fight this one on a moral ground. Like I was wrong, and I'd do it again tomorrow.
We had a nice tweet from Mike on X. No, it's not a tweet anymore, is it? It said, thanks to Over Under Pod, I've learned the UK has jailed the first person under the Nationalities and Borders Act. It's a barbaric story. The Independent writes, Ibrahim Bar, who's over 18, killed 4 other migrants. He has a birth certificate showing he was 17. The barbarism inflicted by border regimes in the Channel and Mediterranean might not be top of the agenda right now, but it's still killing people every day. Yeah, could not agree more. There were a lot of good messages, interesting message and compassionate, kind messages about Ibrahim Abbar. So thanks for writing in. You can find us all over social media, the socials, whether it's Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, X, formerly known as Twitter, Blue Sky. We are at @over_under_pod_.
And a big shout out to the people who signed up to our Patreon this week. We need you. We need your support. If we're going to continue, this is a small black run indie. We're up against the Murdochs and the BBCs and the Gary Linekers of this world. Scrappy old us within the unedited camp. So whatever support, financial support you can give us, be greatly appreciated. The new sign-ups for this week are Sarah, Susan Wilcox, Suzanne de Emily, John, Andy, Amane. Sorry, Amane, if I butchered your name. Vanessa, Sheila, Julia, Christina, and Fiona. Thanks so much to all of you.
Thanks to those brilliant people that Gary just named. We now have 357 paying Patreon supporters. Thank you so much to everyone who has supported us financially via Patreon. Because of you, we're able to keep the podcast running for now, though we do need to hit our target of 400 Patreon supporters by Christmas to have a chance of keeping the podcast running next year. So thank you to everyone who's helped. And if you can help to reach the new target, packages start at £5 a month. So if you want to keep the show running, access a weekly bonus episode, our newsletter, WhatsApp community, just search Over the Top, Under the Radar on the Patreon website. And as Gary would say, put your money where your ears are.
So, Carys, what is your under this week?
Lots of news at the moment, but something I think is flying under the radar, and I don't normally think this person gets a lack of coverage, is Reform UK, the political party headed up by Nigel Farage. It's technically a company, not a political party, so I don't know quite how his job works. A couple of things have happened in the last week that I think have been slightly drowned out by other news stories that I wanted to dig into. The first of which is that Nigel Farage won Newcomer of the Year at the Spectator Awards. The Spectator is a political magazine that leans pretty heavily right. I think Michael Gove has become the new editor, and they have a sort of annual Parliamentarian of the Year awards. They do a kind of do in Westminster. All the political parties go. Wes Streeting was there. Nigel Farage was there. Presumably all the Tories were there. I mean, I guess it was a bit a joke because he's not a newcomer, but he is a new MP. Nigel Farage won Newcomer of the Year. He went on stage and he gave a speech that I'm hoping isn't prescient, but I found quite chilling. He said, I've got a bit of a shock for you if you think that I and 4 other people, the newcomers into Parliament this year in the general election, was a shock. I'm afraid I'm really, really sorry. But in the next election in 2029 or before, there'll be hundreds of newcomers under the Reform UK label. We are about to witness a political revolution, the likes of which we have not seen since Labour after the First World War. The newcomers will win the next election. Thank you very much. So it's this speech and then a couple of high profile defections that I think we aren't talking about enough. There are a couple of journalists who've been writing about it, but Nick Candy, rich property developer married to Holly Valance, for those of you who used to watch Neighbours in the 90s and noughties. Suella Braverman's husband has joined Reform UK, which Suella hasn't. I mean, weird energy, but I feel like a lot of stuff around Suella has a weird energy. The other thing I think we're not talking about enough is, if Nigel Farage's reports are correct, Reform UK has about 100,000 members, which means in terms of membership, it's about the same size as the British Conservative Party. So that's my under the radar. I'd be interested, Gary. I mean, I feel like Farage probably qualifies as a git, to use your parlance, whether you think they're not getting covered enough.
It's not that I don't think they're covered enough. It's just I don't think they're covered well. I think he is covered, like I've said before on the podcast, like you kind of pissed uncle at a party, a barbecue. And the thing that it represents just isn't really well understood. Like, what is this coalition of home counties types and post-industrial area types? Like, how do they see each other? How do they understand each other? What do they want? Because they're kind of brought together by their antagonism towards the mainstream parties and their opposition to immigration, as far as I can see. I don't know, how much else they agree on. To what extent reform is a bit like Tea Party, where it's a kind of, in America, after Obama was elected, which was a kind of sentiment more than an organization. So I think it's not sort of well covered. And I think that it's chilling, and it's chilling because we can see how it would be possible, which is why the left has to be out there offering some different sense of a future.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought up the left, because I mean, technically, parties to the left of Labour won more seats than Reform. If you add the left independents, your Jeremy Corbyns, to the Green MPs, there was more success from left of centre political groups than right-wing ones. But I do think that Nigel Farage, he's got a sense of how you get a drumbeat of news coverage or get lots of attention, like the Nick Candy wealthy businessman married to I don't want to say C-list celebrity, but she's not released a lot of music recently, has she? Holly Valance, they're both big Trump supporters, Trump bundlers. I think they did a fundraiser for Trump earlier this year. That's a moment. He's making the most of it. Suella Braverman, Elon Musk. I don't even know if we can get into Elon Musk saying he wants to donate £10 million to Reform. So even though left-wing politicians did relatively well in the recent election, it's still Reform that get the attention. And I think the main issue with Reform and Farage, and the reason I'm nervous, is we've just seen net migration figures that are high, which with our political discourse is sort of shorthand for bad. We have a political consensus where politicians say one thing about immigration and do another. And we have very few political leaders that challenge Nigel Farage's story about immigration and the impact it's had on the country. And if no one's challenging the story and everyone in the mainstream parties is effectively saying, well, not quite, but, he's got a point, eventually you're just going to vote for the guy that says he's going to do something about immigration that hasn't had a chance to do it yet. And I think that not understanding that taking him on means defeating him and his arguments, it's not the only thing. I'm not naive enough to think it's just about producing some facts about immigration. But if we don't have another story or a coherent narrative, or we just want to dodge the question or steal his language, like long term, I think the wind is blowing his way. But the logic of voting for the person who is committed to do something big on the thing that's apparently causing all of our problems, I just think it's a bit inexorable. So
it's
a bit worried about Reform UK.
It's an interesting thing, isn't it? The way that they will, when it comes to the economy, when it comes to heating for old people or the 2-child cap, they'll say, look, we've got to make some tough choices. They're really happy to tell people things that they don't want to hear. They're really happy to look like this is a reality. But when it comes to immigration, they don't do that, and they could. And I think people could understand it if you said, look, we are an aging population with a labor shortage. If you want people to look after you in your old age, if you want a health service that can operate, then we will need immigration. One wonders, one doesn't because you know where it's coming from. But if they're happy to preach reality and give us a hard conversation that we don't want to have about why we can't heat ourselves, then why wouldn't they? Or why don't they have that hard conversation that engages reality about why those immigration numbers are embedded in our economy and in our culture? They just won't do it. It's cowardly.
It's cowardly, but I just think also it's short-sighted. It's driving the mistrust or the lack of trust because people are saying one thing and doing another. And then eventually it's like, we've got no credibility on this. Voters have a strong sense of when they're being lied to or when something doesn't ring true. And seeing Kemi Badenoch and Keir Starmer go at it at PMQs about immigration caps when, both Keir Starmer's predecessor and Kemi Badenoch's predecessors sort of said we're going to be tough on immigration whilst allowing it to increase and never explaining why. I think it's in the absence of an explanation and the assumption that you can talk out of both sides of your mouth is what creates the open goal for Farage, until we challenge the idea that the things that have gone wrong, the decline of our public services, are all caused by Black and brown people or people who aren't British. I think we're just paving the way for him. But I hope to be wrong. So Gary, what do you think has been going under the radar this week?
A leading academic publisher, Elsevier, is reviewing its decision to publish research papers by the late British professor Richard Lynn. Richard Lynn was an influential figure in what is called race science. And race science is a group of, all the ones I know about are men, white men, who feel that they can prove and have gone to some length to prove that Black people are just more stupid than white people. They work on a basis of mostly a racial hierarchy where what they call Orientals are narrowly more clever than white people and the Black people are all the way down at the bottom. Now, some listeners may have seen a video clip that did go viral of me arguing with the racist Richard Spencer. And that was at a conference of these race scientists. They are incredibly boring and stupid people. Elsevier used to publish Richard Lynn stuff. Now, he's dead now, but I interviewed Richard Lynn years ago, and I asked him if he was a scientific racist. And he said, if we're talking about people who believe there are genetic differences between the races, then I am definitely a scientific racist. That's what he told me. This was years and years ago. He also has suggested in the past, in an interview with the Far Right magazine, that the US should break up into racially segregated nations so that white civilization would survive. So he's not a particularly subtle guy. He produced this set of data scores from polling around the world, which he claimed proved that black people are more stupid. And this data is used by white supremacist groups. It is also massively not just questioned, but kind of trashed by people in that field. For the national IQ of Angola, it was based on 19 people from a malaria study. The Eritrean average IQ was taken from tests of children in orphanages. According to him, the average national IQ for Malawi, Mozambique, and Nigeria are all below the typical threshold for intellectual disability. So you're talking about these whole countries being like mentally impaired. It's obviously nonsense. And what you have to wonder is why Elsevier were publishing this stuff at all. And a lot of his stuff was being cited elsewhere. There's a guy called Jean-Philippe Rushton. He'd say he would never describe himself as a racist. Part of his study was on the relationship between IQ and penis size. And his conclusion was it's a trade-off. More brain or more penis, you can't have everything. Guess what black people had? Some of these people were getting kind of accolades from Reagan. Roger Pearson, who was born in Britain but lived in the US, he got a letter of congratulation from Reagan for his contribution to the conservative cause. So now Elsevier are reviewing its decision to publish research papers. Thank God. Here's my point about these people. It's really 2 points. The first is that these people are still out there and they still, even though the stuff that they produce can be roundly trashed, not least because what genetic studies show is that we're all more alike than we are unalike, and that there is more variation within so-called racial groups than there are between them. But these people are out there and they're pushing this stuff, and there are willing sellers and there are willing buyers. They're going to get stronger, not weaker, particularly given the election results in America and so on. But the second is that their kind of connection, the thin mesh between them and respectability. Only now is Elsevier kind of saying, we'll take a look at it. You're responsible for what you publish, you know. This should have been reviewed and withdrawn quite a long time ago. Not because I don't know the conclusions. I mean, I don't, and they're patently nonsense, but because actually, as a piece of research, it is inadequate. So that's my under.
I'd never even heard of Richard Lynn. I'm not going to lie, I don't feel that I've been missing out much. Someone that we know, and you all should know, Rachel Shabby, wrote a book about anti-Semitism in which she looks at Jewishness and whiteness. And yeah, she skewers a lot of the race science pretty effectively because it's not based on science, is it? It's just kind of based on vibes. There's one passage where she talks about some race scientists confidently asserting that Jewish people are black, even though they don't look black. They've just got like a black energy. And yeah, I find all these people ludicrous. You're right to point out that some of them still have some legitimacy. I mean, I don't know. Is this a journal? Don't they have standards?
Well, they're an academic publisher. The issue is that clearly their standards are not adequate because they've only just started to review what he's done, whereas many of his peers have been pointing out the problem for ages. Is that thing when people hide behind the science and then we all have to live with that. That Toni Morrison quote, that the functions, he said, the very serious function of racism is distraction. Keeps you from doing your work. It keeps you explaining over and over again your reason for being. Somebody says you have no language and then you spend 20 years proving that you do. Somebody said your hair isn't shaped properly, so you have scientists working on the fact that it is. None of this is necessary. There will always be one more thing. And it's very much these people are one more thing, but the fact that they're still there and their ties to both academic and political respectability mean that we have to keep these receipts, really.
There's something about the internet age that I think makes these academics a bit more dangerous and makes people who choose to publish them complicit in perpetuating racism, right? Because you could be in a debate with someone and they could throw out Richard Lynn's name and then you could Google him and see he's written a ton of papers and be like, oh, well, I guess he's like a serious academic. And it's like, no, very much not. He's just kind of a bananas human who thinks you can estimate the IQs of entire nations based on a couple of conversations. Sidebar, it would be a waste of time, a la Toni Morrison quote, but I would be curious to just learn some of his ridiculous methodologies that resulted in his results. But yeah, I think there's something dangerous, potentially dangerous about the internet age, AI age, where things like ChatGPT are just scraping the web and don't have human discernment. And then I guess the other thing it makes me think about is how any system or industry that profits from injustice also has its kind of shadow set of institutions manufacturing the like intellectual or scientific basis for it, whether that's like tobacco companies lobbying to not be regulated and, you know, funding spurious studies saying smoking's fine, to the race scientists that maintain white supremacy. This idea that there will always be this like manufactured intellectual base. That's also true in the case of migration. There are a lot of like spurious think tanks and academics that seem to exist to support notions like Britain is full.
So my over is 2026.
You're over 2026? Hasn't even happened yet.
I'm over the chat about 2026, which is from a number of American friends that I've spoken to who, absorbing the blow of Trump, have said, yeah, it's going to be a tough 2 years. The 2-year thing can only be because there will be midterms. There's no other reason to talk about 2 years' time. There will be midterms 2026. So for readers who aren't familiar with the way the American polity works, there is a presidential election every 4 years, and every 2 years, the whole of the House of Representatives, which is the lower house, and a third of the Senate also go up for election. So there are elections every 2 years. And the assumption is it'll take 2 years to turn this around electorally and to defeat him and to get back the House and the Senate. I hope that they're right. I hope that in 2 years' time things do turn around. But I think that they go over the top about this. So this isn't an over the top about what the press are doing. It's about what people are saying. It assumes an electoral vehicle for challenging him. And I think what the Democrats have proved is that they are an inadequate electoral vehicle. We got 2 years to get it right. I feel like misunderstands the political situation and substitutes an electoral timetable for it. That the things that are wrong, a lot of that stuff really has to kind of start immediately, and in some sense have to be able to put together a program that might deliver for people. In the absence of that, there's just no saying that in 2 years things won't be worse.
Interesting one. I hadn't heard it, even though I'm deep in the American political podcast game, but maybe I'm behind. I guess it connects with something I have thought. I won't name names, but like listening to one of the many post-match analysis where it was a number of staffers who were sort of talking about, you know, how they didn't lose that much really, given how little time they had with Kamala. And I kind of left the conversation feeling like, I don't think you're feeling bad enough about this, which is not something it's not a compassionate sentiment that I normally want to bring to politics. But I think that sort of emotional desolation, oh my God, we just got knocked out and we're out of power and this is awful. I just feel like it's a little bit more soul searching, and the idea of being like, okay, guys, well, you know, it's just going to be a tough 2 years till the midterms. I think it's hubristic, but I also think it ignores the last midterms we had. The thing that seems to be true across a lot of our democracies is that the old rules don't hold and things are incredibly volatile. And we saw that in 2022 when normally, predictably, the midterm elections see a swing away from whoever is president. So when it was Barack Obama, a swing towards Republicans. And in 2022, after Roe versus Wade was overturned and states started clamping down on abortion rights, we saw a very atypical midterm, and we didn't see the Democrats being annihilated. And people were quick to draw conclusions from that may have led to some of the mistakes in the 2024 campaign. But this idea of like, we'll get another bite of the apple or the cherry or whatever fruit it is in 2 years' time, I think is based on a false assumption. There's no guarantee that Democrats just get a pendulum swing back in 2026.
Well, I think certainly if they don't have the ideas and the program to actually, lead through to kind of offer some hope and direction, which they certainly didn't have in November.
Yeah, I think there's something about these 2-year time horizons because of the House of Representatives that are to blame for this sort of toxic thinking. Like, I just think there are too many elections in America. We haven't even got onto state level or attorney generals. But when your job is up for renewal in 2 years and you're a politician and you've got to fundraise, right? You've got to raise often millions of dollars to even be able to run again, stand again, depending on your parlance. I think that's a bad time horizon.
And also, I mean, I get that you need some kind of horizon. You need some, but the Democrats are just an inadequate vehicle for that anyway. I know they're the only electoral vehicle, so ultimately the energy will pass through them to the ballot box. It doesn't start with them, and it can't start with their timetable. There'll be a bunch of stuff that we're going to have to, or that the left will have to do much sooner than that, and there'll be a bunch of stuff that will take a longer time. And in all the time that I was there, mostly what I saw was kind of Democrats mostly getting in the way of that kind of progressive stuff, not leading it.
So my over the top, this story has taken up a lot of my time. I've been deep online. I try not to spend too much time on the internet. This story has changed that for me. So my over the top is Luigi Mangione. Apologies to Italians.
No, that was good. I really thought you were Italian.
Thank you. Thanks. For those who do not know, Luigi Mangione is the 26-year-old man who has been accused of murdering the chief executive of United Healthcare, Brian Thompson. Again, for those of you who missed the story, last week, Brian Thompson was attending an investor meeting at his employer's offices in New York, United Healthcare, a health insurance company in America, and he was shot at point blank range by a hooded man, we assume. Within about 5 days, thanks to a national manhunt, a young man called Luigi Mangione was arrested in a McDonald's. And the thing that I'm not over Luigi, Gary, and I'm not over the story. It's very rich. There's a lot going on. I'm obsessed with it. And there are a lot of great memes, which is always important to me. But I think the thing that I'm over, and it's only really just begun, is that whenever something like this happens, an incident with a shooter in particular, a violent attack on someone, there's this fixation with the person that pulled the trigger, which drowns out the important parts of the story. So this has partly happened with Luigi because he is widely considered to be an attractive man. So the first wave of interest in him was when the mugshot came out, and there were a lot of some inappropriate, but many quite humorous, I'd take his shot jokes. I'm here for I like inappropriate humor. But the thing that I kind of had a sinking feeling when they caught him within 5 days. I was like, oh no. Every bowel movement, every online review that Luigi has ever done is about to be sifted through, overanalyzed to death, as if it will give us some unique insight into because he's such an interesting person. And there's a lot that's interesting about this incident, about the accused. This he read this book on Goodreads and he said this. In his now defunct Reddit account, it said that he had back pain and da-da-da-da. And meanwhile, very few media outlets have published his manifesto, which, we discussed it with the Trump shooting. Journalists love a manifesto. He wrote one. Very few outlets are publishing that in full. Very few outlets are digging into United Healthcare and why, when one of its senior executives was killed, the overwhelming response online was had it coming, which for me is the interesting part of this story, right? There's this huge groundswell, current, resentment, anger, rage at this company, at health insurance companies, to the point that a man can be gunned down in the street and people are openly, if not celebrating, kind of being well, here's what happened when my kid needed chemo. So there's this huge anger, class anger, I think it is, anger at corporations, And we're just getting pictures of Luigi's abs. And like, he's got good abs. I'm very impressed, especially if he was in the amount of chronic pain that, you know, his Reddit suggests. But I feel like this need to like really obsess over the individual and not talk about like the politics of it, the meaning of it, the significance of it, just seemed like the wrong priorities. I'll give you one more example and then I want to hear what you think about Luigi. The McDonald's, so, you know, there was a lot of jokes, you know, that he's a Robin Hood character, whoever killed that, you know, conducted this shooting and people shouldn't snitch on him. The McDonald's, where they called the police on him, received so many 1-star Google reviews that Google have had to pull the reviews. People were putting stuff like, rats in the kitchen, do not go, which again, you've got to concede is quite witty. So there's something going on here around this. And I don't think it's Luigi's abs and how could somebody who went to private school kill someone, which again, I just don't find that surprising. So I'm not over Luigi, but I am over just this way of covering political stories to almost depoliticize them.
I know from being in the newsroom that when these things happen, they scrub around for whatever they can get. Like it's an interesting thing where they clear the space. This will be different now because of the internet. You got infinite space. You used to have finite space, but they say, right, we're going to do 2 pages on the killer. Before you know anything about the killer might be just really boring. You might not have anything. So then, you know, people go to where they lived and they get quotes from lots of people saying that they didn't know him. Well, that's kind of, that's what they do. Now you can trace people through electronic media and their socials. You can say, well, you know, he liked this and he didn't like that and he likes shots of cats and he seems to be a very garrulous fellow and you get all of the pictures straight away. You don't have to have someone go to the house and ask if there's a little picture. You can we put so much of our lives online that people can draw them out. I couldn't be sure whether you were saying about the manifesto. I mean, I think they're right not to publish the manifesto. If you think that shooting someone's going to get your manifesto published, then all sorts of people will just get shot. And I don't know that Luigi's got much very useful to say. I mean, I don't know him. I'd say this. One of the things,
and a lot of mugshots. He's getting a lot of photo
I mean,
shoots in prison. Is all I'll say.
Hot. I'm a heterosexual man, and I can see that. Yeah. But anyway, sorry. What I do find interesting in this story is the way that some kinds of violence become kind of clearly outrageous and clearly objectionable and deeply problematic. In this case, shooting somebody dead. People are like, well, you can't do that. But then there's other kinds of violence in this story. The violence that is meted out by the insurance companies when they stop giving someone chemo. So, you know, there's more than one kind of violence. And one kind of violence is physical violence or, in this case, kind of almost paramilitary violence. But there's also economic violence and in this case, corporate violence. I'm not saying that because of the corporate violence that this person was the head of, that it's okay. I'm not saying that. We live in a world where there are enough mechanisms that just shooting someone in the head can't be the right way to fix something. I think that you become kind of not just thick-skinned, but hard-hearted if you're like, well, he had that coming to him. The price to pay for corporate violence shouldn't be execution. And that man is also responsible for the deaths of large numbers of people, even if he didn't pull a trigger on them. And there has to be a way to keep both those things in your mind at the same time.
Yes, you're right to point out that vigilante executions are not an appropriate response to corporate malpractice, corporate cruelty, whatever you want to call it. It's interesting the point about how it used to work and how it works now, right? Marking out the physical newspaper, this number of column inches, because I do think going through someone's online accounts is the equivalent of knocking on neighbors' doors and then being like, yeah, I never knew him. We don't really talk. It's like, oh, he left a 4-star Argos review on, like suddenly everyone's like a psychologist or a sleuth. You're right, we shouldn't publish his manifesto in full. But in terms of like what he thinks and why, he wrote it down on a piece of paper. He 3D printed a gun and shot someone. So I'm not saying what's written on that piece of paper is like definitive, but it is his account of what happened. And they're like, oh, I think I found a Reddit forum and, he had back pain and he went surfing in Hawaii. Like it's this like piecing together of his life and his story that, I don't know, we're getting a lot more than asking neighbors and hearing they saw him took the bins out. Maybe that's wrong. Maybe someone's going to uncover an online thing. But yeah, I think it's that same thing of this endless fascination with the individual that I don't think warrants it, even if he is, by many people's accounts, hot.
Hang on, when you say many people's accounts, do you mean you don't find him hot?
Do you know what? Like, I get that he's a good-looking guy, but I don't know if I personally fancy him. I mean, I know he's got you hot.
Yeah, I was going to say, maybe I can fancy him enough for both
of us. He's very classically attractive. I don't know. I'd have to interrogate him more. I'll come back to you on next week's episode if he's still in the news. So thank you for listening to Over the Top, Under the Radar. Remember to like, subscribe, and please leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts.
If you want to support the show, find us by searching Over the Top, Under the Radar on Patreon.
You can sign up to receive our newsletter at overunderpod.com.
And connect with us on socials at over_under_pod_. So
next week's episode will be a chance to hear our live event with Bel Ribeiro Addy. That'll be dropping in your feeds next week. Don't miss it.